So just before I open up questions, I just wanted to start with some basics about decentralized finance, because the problem with DeFi is you could almost miss it if you didn't know what people were talking about. One of the things I would like to do as a non-member of the blockchain community is say, can we change the acronym, please, right? Because DeFi sounds like DFI, right? So just, you know, a development finance institution. I use the term dozens of times a day in a bank. And if someone says, oh yeah, DeFi, if they just like slightly linger on the D, suddenly is it distributed finance or whatever, you know. But anyway, I want to make the point that decentralized finance, DeFi, is a new era which is opening out, but it's very much the end evolution of a process which started quite a while ago with the beginnings of blockchain. And I think there are many issues around it. It's not just about the finance, it's very much about the system which is decentralized. It's about a system which is much more democratic. It's about removing blockages, all kinds of barriers and blockages, and we're going to hear about some of the technology out there as well. But I think it's also deep down, ultimately, about trust, about being able to put trust in a certain place and the ability to transfer it. That is something which is intangible, but we have tangible aspects of it in our lives the whole time. Our passports, our education records, our driver's license, our bank card, etc., etc. Once that sort of stuff can get onto the blockchain and into decentralized networks, it really changes the whole picture. So why don't we start by talking about DeFi, because that's what the panel's supposed to be about before we hijack it for something else. Decentralized finance, it's often been described as blockchain-based finance because it doesn't use the traditional intermediaries. You don't need banks, you don't need exchanges, brokers, no one's in the middle, it's the individual. So is it blockchain finance, or am I getting this one wrong? Maybe if you want to kick off, Rotimi. What do you think DeFi is?
Before I upset the fintech world or the crypto geeks, DeFi is literally blockchain finance, right? Because it's built on the blockchain, and we have so many protocols on the blockchain. So at the end of the day, it's blockchain finance. So same way you can have blockchain transports, blockchain medicals, blockchain gaming, it's blockchain finance.
Excellent, very nice. What about you, Chris? How would you describe it?
I wouldn't disagree with that. I would probably describe it slightly differently, because if you look at the history of cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin, there's always been a strong decentralized element. Anything that uses an open blockchain is decentralized. But then as this technology has become more popular, some institutions have used blockchain-like technology and controlled some elements of it. And then finance on that, I would say, is not always decentralized, because some permissioned or blockchain-like technologies which have finance on them are not decentralized. The way I would look at it is you can always decentralize a bit more when the blockchain exists. So you can always take out the centralized exchange. You can use cryptocurrencies without having to register on Coinbase or something else. And every time there's a new opportunity not to use a centralized part of the value chain, the degree of decentralization increases. So decentralization is kind of like a journey where you can always do a little bit, you can always be a bit more decentralized, and then a bit more decentralized, and then a bit more decentralized.
Mm-hmm. And I think that explains also it's so difficult because it captures so many different kinds of technologies and activities. Nicholas, what about from your perspective? You're not specifically a DeFi person, though of course you're very much involved in it. Yeah. What would you see it as, or how would you describe it?
Well, I think there's a difference between distributed ledgers and blockchain in terms of what they mean in terms of trust. So I call it distributed trust in a way. You know, your point of proof of trust, speed of trust, how quickly can we have access to, you know, prove what is ours, and actually that the whole world witnesses each transaction, and that's the distributed bit really. But it goes beyond finance for me. It's distributed trust in all areas, and I think you mentioned a few things: legal, education, healthcare. You know, how can we actually protect that? How do we decentralize it? How do we build the trust?
Absolutely, and I think it's interesting seeing, particularly when you look at African markets, very often the instruments, the financial instruments which are used in Africa are quite outdated to what is used elsewhere in the world. I mean, in the world of trade that I've been a lot involved in, LCs, letters of credit, are very common. Open an LC. But there are some European countries or European companies which haven't used an LC ever. And the whole point about an LC is that there is no trust between the parties. It's essentially an importer and exporter who don't know each other or don't trust each other, but they say, I more or less trust my bank more or less trusts me, that bank more or less trusts that bank, okay, we'll do a letter of credit between them, and ultimately that's how the transaction will happen. But everything about that transaction is suggesting that there's no trust between the parties. So I think it's exactly as you said, this idea, if you can decentralize the trust, but maybe then if we should ask the question slightly differently, rather than what is DeFi, more like why? Why do we need DeFi? What gap is it actually filling? Because there are lots of other alternative sources of finance, right? If you think of all the crowdsourcing that there is out there, there's also angel financing, maybe there are other ways as well. Why do we need DeFi? I don't know, if you want to start with you?
I'll let Chris.
You Chris.
No, that's very kind of you. I mean, the Celo blockchain, which is an open permissionless blockchain where I work, this was just going back to the last panel where we heard about how important it is to have the mission. I mean, I had worked in conventional finance up until September, mainly in financial research. And this particular blockchain has a mission which means everyone with a mobile phone should be able to access any currency whenever they wish. It could be a central bank digital currency, it could be a cryptocurrency, it could be one of the stable coins that Rotimi was talking about previously. And this is such a powerful image because many parts of many of the benefits that people are consistently locked out of can only really be achieved with this type of technology. If you really think about it, how are you ever going to get the type of individual credit score that gives you the opportunity to buy things monthly or to get a loan, unless there's some of the sort of transparent record that you can have as if you had been using cash. As a cash substitute, it really makes a difference. So Celo is a blockchain which is mobile first, so you can use it just on your mobile, and the method of driving adoption has been to generate two stable coins, the Celo Euro and the Celo dollar, which gives people a stable source of value. And the use case examples have happened all over Africa and all over the world, generally for situations where people who don't have a bank account are having cash dispensed to them, some sort of aid distribution, Care International, the World Food Programme. They're the types of organisations that have trialed Celo to try and get the to try and give people some sort of empowerment that currently doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And so far, so good. 1.5 million wallet users, and it's working well. But the transformational effect on this is enormous. Things that you couldn't ordinarily buy, like micro insurance, all the hedging things, the gaming things, the things that are on the blockchain are open to everyone. So at Celo we call it DeFi for the people, because that's the idea.
Mm. Exactly, and that makes sense because that gets back to a lot of this idea about empowerment, which comes from this as well. But I think it's also interesting, this idea you say, that this right to hold your own credit score, because perhaps one of the most frustrating things, if you think about it, is that you might, let's say in the case of Kenya, if you have your M-Pesa account, you might have had it for 10 years, straight away, as soon as you do transactions, you get a credit rating, and you can start borrowing against that, provided you're borrowing via M-Pesa. You go to a completely different company, you've got to start all over again. You can't transfer that credit history. And I think that thing about transferring who you are is the big issue here, because multiply having to constantly do KYC. You told us a bit, Rotimi, about some of the gaps here that we've seen are being filled. I mean, a key one, making those key transfers from Africa to pay for school fees, remittances, etc. But can you see other gaps where you could really see DeFi helping, maybe on an even bigger scale when we're thinking about business here, levels of business?
I mean, like you said, let's look at credit rating and credit scoring for individuals, right? Like you said on M-Pesa, someone that's been using M-Pesa in Kenya for the past maybe 5 years has no credit rating system in Kenya. He can't borrow money from any bank in Kenya. He might be able to borrow money from M-Pesa, but I doubt that. But guess what? Whatever amount he has in his wallet, his M-Pesa wallet, is actually sitting with M-Pesa's parent company's bank account. So all the millions of customers that M-Pesa has today, their funds are being warehoused in a corporate entity's bank balance. That corporate entity can borrow against every other person's bank balance, right? Every other person's transaction history. But the people that actually own the funds, own the monies, can't.
And they get nothing for it. I mean, well, there are saving products which are available, absolutely. But on this point though, so where do you see DeFi filling a hole?
I mean, with the ability to verify your identity and also transfer your identity regardless of whatever network it is. That's beautiful. With the kind of wallet systems that are existing these days, right? You can have multiple wallets within one ID, right? So you can have a Bitcoin wallet, an Ethereum wallet, a Solana wallet. You can have multiple wallets, right? It's one ID, right? So you don't have to re-verify yourself, right? And we have staking within the crypto space. So if you're holding maybe $1,000 worth of Ethereum, you can stake it and earn interest on that, or you can actually borrow against it. That's DeFi.
Absolutely. Well, it's so interesting because you got onto this very specific issue about identity. And I wonder maybe actually, Nick, if you could talk a bit now, because particularly about how your technology is used to do, as you said, get this one identity which can move across, but obviously that connects the real world of the human being with the digital world.
Yeah, so first of all, the last point about that, I don't mind saying I've got a terrible credit rating. And it's not fair. And it is one of those things that a decentralized system, DeFi, would solve for me. And it's mainly because I entered my last business, and then I bought a house without a mortgage, and I don't have credit cards, and because of that, I don't take credit out. And because of that, I've got a bad credit rating. And so it stops me from even just getting a mobile phone from my child. They go, "You've got a terrible credit rating." Sorry, mate. And it's like, I own my own house, and I deal with these things. But anyway, I wanted to. I came from the music industry actually, and I was working owning music festivals. I was just trying to find a way. How can I bring identity and security, safety to my customers going to festivals? And I started to work with MasterCard, and that was wristbands. It was the beginning of contactless, and that basically didn't solve my problem. You know, at the end of the festival, they all took it off, threw it in the bin, and I lost contact with everybody, and they all came back next year, and I couldn't recognise them. How do I find out my customers? How do I build that long-term relationship? So, went to biometrics. When you look at a music festival, people having fun, dancing, slopping drinks around, most biometrics wouldn't work because of the lighting conditions, whatever. I started to use Vein ID. I thought, right, we'll test that one. It's internal to the finger. Completely.
What exactly is that? Sorry, Vein ID?
Vein ID. So it is using a little infrared light. It makes your hemoglobin glow, and we get a very clear map of the vein pattern inside your skin. So it's very clear, completely unique. In terms of uniqueness, it's 3.5 billion to 1, whereas a fingerprint's 10,000 to 1 uniqueness. So hugely unique, very private. What I do then is link your debit and credit cards, American Express, tickets, VIP, accreditation, all to your finger or fingers. And that's all you need to carry, so you can't lose it. If somebody does remove your finger, then it doesn't work anymore. You need a heart attached to it, right? You need blood pressure. It's a medical device, they're only cheap, but pulse oximetry, it can spot the other signs of heart disease, diabetes, because it's looking at blood saturation levels.
So it actually does a medical check at the same time.
Medical check.
It says, you better not eat that. We've actually changed your order for you because you have a smart contract in there, right?
Exactly. Do not eat that donut. Yeah, we don't take any medical detail at the moment. What we do is just look for an inflated vein pattern, 200 milliseconds with a process transaction. If we dial it down 9 seconds, we could pretty much give you a full health check in terms of what's in your blood. Using near infrared you can. So,
well, I probably think at festivals you wouldn't want to actually tell people what's in there. Maybe until a few weeks later anyway, don't tell their bosses yet. But that's really interesting, and of course it's how it can connect to anything, because this is the very practical side of it, of how you have a piece of technology and, as you said, it links to the single identity. But I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the single identity thing, because this for me is where it gets much broader than DeFi, and it gets into this whole concept of self-sovereign technology, or SovTech as it's sometimes called. The idea that you actually own everything about yourself. So that means you own who you are digitally. And with blockchain, you have the possibility that it could all either be in one place or accessible extremely easily. And you share certain parts of that with the rest of the world. So I'm just interested in that, you know, as a concept, how you can see that being developed. Where do you see the sort of the best applications are, or maybe even examples of SovTech now coming out?
I mean, I think one of the issues my role really at Cello is often to talk to the central banks and the governments about, so they're not too scared of crypto, because one of the problems that we have, and you know, if some people would have heard Rotimi's presentation, there's a huge amount of promise, but there's also a heck of a lot of fear. And one of the areas of fear is around privacy and identity and this sort of thing. So anything that can have a solution which, as a collective, as a society, we think is okay, and we think is that there's enough data that we're prepared to share, and we can hold on to the bits that we're happy with, is a good thing. Because at the moment, in many countries, it's very, very messy. I mean, in this country, you give your data to Facebook, you give your data to the NHS, you give your data to your employer, you give your data to the gym. They often have no compulsion to protect your data from cyber attack. There are different levels of scrutiny and security that they give your that they handle your data once you've given it to them, and the types of data they ask for is also not mandated. So the idea of some sort of digital authentication system is very appealing when it comes to decentralized finance, and also adds to the simplicity of it as well. I mean, on Cello, it's a very easy thing to sign up to the wallet and to get the stablecoin straight away. You don't need a public key, you don't need a private key, but the identity piece is always the piece which causes a lot of the most fraught discussion amongst policymakers. So this would be very useful. One of the things that I thought that Nick said was very interesting is you can then tie your fingerprint to the phone itself. Yeah. So the phone itself is then authenticated. I guess that will have to be kind of updated and checked in some way periodically. But you then have a way of doing that. So I think some sort of digital authentication system would go a long way to alleviating the fears that people associate with cryptocurrencies.
Absolutely, it's so much an unknown, because I think one of the problems with cryptos as well is that even if you find someone who has a crypto company or an exchange or is definitely into it, you say, look, I don't really understand, can you explain more? All that happens is by the end you understand less and less until the point comes where your trust is zero, because you might say, I trust you and your story, but I literally couldn't explain anything to anyone about how it works. All I know is I really don't understand what I'm talking about. So that's sort of one of the complexities with it. But I just wonder on this issue as well, what you think you can do with this kind of technology in terms of self-sovereign technology, because of course all of the information that you are getting and using for your clients ultimately can be used for anything. And I take it, are they trying to go for the same kind of single identity with you guys that they can then use in multiple different places?
I would say yes and no, right? Yes, because I mean our customers would like to be able to use their wallets, whether in Nigeria or Ghana or Kenya, right, without having to change currencies, and that's one thing that crypto offers, right? Then I would say no, because there's like you said, there's the fear of lack of understanding. Right? They don't really get what it is, and I think that's largely because the incumbents and the big players in the financial industry have ensured that the clarity kind of like doesn't get up, right? Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure if you explain derivatives to the average man on the street, it doesn't understand it, right? But it trusts it. If you explain how mortgage works or how compound interest works to the average man, he probably won't get it. But they trust it because the banks have said that's good. So I think it's very important for us to build a proof of trust. Then we can solve the sovereign problem.
Patricia, crypto made easy.